In this episode of the Into the Storm Leaders podcast, we talk about how people most naturally get shit done. We leverage the Kolbe system and the 6 types of working genius and have Kimberly Dyer, who's certified in both of those, along with being a professional EOS implementer, to tell us her story of how she was introduced to these systems, how it's been both freeing and validating for her and many of the clients that she's worked with, and how it frees them up to focus more on the type of work that brings energy rather than stress. If you've taken things like Myers-Briggs and DISC and predictive index, look, there's value in those tools, but those are the affective part of the brain. It's typically your emotion. Whereas the Kolbe system and 6 types of working genius tap into the cognitive part of somebody's mind. It's how they naturally take action. It's innate over your lifetime. If you've not been exposed to these in the past, you're going to want to check out this episode. If you have, you probably do too. At the end of it, take a free Kolbe A assessment, set up some time to review it with our guest on today's episode, Kimberly Dyer, so that way you can ensure you're aligning your work with your natural strengths and you better understand your team so that way the next time that you're putting together a project or a task force, you're doing less cloning and building better balance so that way you can get different perspectives, different action modes, and a better result. Welcome to Into the Storm Leaders, the no BS podcast that ignites leadership potential and sparks innovation in the ever-evolving business landscape we all work in. I'm Joe Jurek, your host and catalyst for growth, joined by my co-host and Culture Shock senior coach, Pete Hansberger. Together, we embark on a journey to uncover the strategies, mindsets, and actions that drive truly exceptional leadership and winning culture. Whether you're an emerging leader looking to level up in your career or an accomplished executive seeking fresh perspectives, join us as we uncover inspiring stories and thought-provoking insights from proven leaders and share practical takeaways that enable courageous leadership. Get ready to charge into the storm and become a catalyst for better workplace culture. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Into the Storm Leaders podcast. This is one of your hosts, Joe Jurek, and I have with me today our very own Kimberly Dyer from Culture Shock. I feel fortunate enough to work with you on a regular basis. I'm not going to steal any of your thunder because you've got plenty to rain down with, but I'm super pumped to have you today, Kimberly, and to introduce our listeners to you. So hi.
Hi, Joe. Hi, listeners. Fun to be here.
Being the first time that you're here in the studio at Traction Leadership Center, we want to interview successful business leaders, have them share what peak leadership really looks like to them, a little bit about your journey, talk about charging into storms, dealing with uncertainty and challenges and things that are uncomfortable. And boy, if you're going to share any of the ones I already know, they're going to be good. And I'm willing to bet you've probably got a bag full of some others as well. But to kick things off, we'll first give you a chance just to say hi and introduce yourself however you'd like to. And then we'll get into personal best and business best.
Great. So for those of you listening, I'm Kimberly Dyer. I am here at the Culture Shock team. My role here is a certified EOS implementer. Those of you not familiar, of course, it's the entrepreneurial operating system. It has been my passion to work with leadership teams for about 6 years now. Just under about 300 sessions so far. In addition, I am certified in Kolbe, which is what we're going to talk about today. And I'm also certified in something called the Working Genius, which belongs to Patrick Lencioni in the Table Group.
And I am a fan since we benefit from you being certified in those and also operate on them ourselves. That's something we'll get into, or some of those different dynamics, how we leverage them. And I'm curious to pick your brain on how you got into some of those things. Before we get there, and we'll have time for all of that, let's talk personal best, business best. We've not seen each other in the office in a little bit. We've both been busy with sessions and other things going on. So what's been up? What's one thing that you would say is share worthy since we last saw each other in personal life and business life?
So my personal life since last time I saw you was I got to see all 3 of my adult children. I have 3 kiddos that live in 2 in Chicago, 1 in DC, and I have managed to see all 3 of them. Had a great time with each of them, together and separate. So I was a very proud mom of adult children. That was a great thing for me.
Awesome.
Business best. It is quarterly season for so many of our clients. They're at the halfway mark. It is just, I take so much satisfaction, if not pride, in seeing the progress my teams are making and seeing how they see it. They are in disbelief the amount of work they can get done every 90 days. One of them said to me recently, this quarter felt like a year in the level of accomplishment.
Hmm.
So it is an absolute pleasure to work with teams and give them the assistance and the guidance and occasional kick in the butt.
Love it. Can relate in a big way. And something would be wrong if I couldn't. What brought us all together is common mission to discover, engage, and grow leaders.
Yep.
Right. And what's been most gratifying for me is the same. Working with leaders and seeing the progress that they make and just being able to contribute to that in any way. And had a session yesterday and somebody had a similar comment in their kind of awe or amazement in the camaraderie that this group had built in 4 months. Said it feels like we've known each other a lot longer. Well, it's kind of a testament to you can't fake trust, but you can accelerate it if you're intentional about it.
Yeah. Look back to some of your prior sessions here and how you and Pete have discussed the speed of trust and how this program that you all have created really accelerates that.
I've been fortunate enough to have lived it, right? Experienced it first here at Culture Shock. And something that I was first introduced to, so I can't say this was my idea, but in addition to the personal business best, we do kind of like a vulnerability share. I guess I should probably say too, though. Huh?
Yes, you should lead with vulnerability.
I should lead with vulnerability. Personal best, business best. It's summer. I've got a 4.5-year-old little girl and a 2.5-year-old little boy. Daughter's in karate, kicking butt, literally and metaphorically. Loves it. Got her first stripe on her belt. Hilarious. And my son's hand-eye coordination, affinity towards baseball, is just leveling up in major strides. But every time he hits a ball, there's like a tracking magnet, and it hits me in the face or somebody. So there's that concern, but also the hilarity that comes with it. That's personal best for me, for sure.
Love it.
And then business best is probably this. We've recorded 6 or 7 episodes of this podcast and generally gotten a good response so far. And I love the interactions I'm getting to have and ability to get to share some of this stuff. And that's definitely the business best as of late.
Excellent.
So when we talk vulnerability share, I like first job, worst job, family dynamic, and a challenge that we faced as children that had an influence or shaped us. The reason we like to do this with new connections, new groups, leadership teams, first time we're at a conference or a meeting, is because we work alongside people sometimes for years without knowing much about them. And it's often so surface level that it kind of opens a door. It's formative impact from things that we experienced as a child. And then also just some humor that often comes with first job, worst job. So since I'm leading, I'll go first. I'll tell you, Dairy Queen was my first job. And while for a couple years there, I couldn't touch Dairy Queen, I've come back around where I love it again. But started working there when I was 14, a week after I turned 14, because it was the only place I could at that age. And the odd thing about that, it was by no means my worst job. My best man at my wedding was my first GM. My wife also worked at Dairy Queen. And we have this DQ crew that has stuck together 20 years later. That still stays in contact, gets together a couple times a year. And that seems almost unheard of. I tell people that and they're like, what? So how about you? First job, worst job? You pick.
So first job might speak to the entrepreneurial spirit, which was in my family. If you wanted something, you had to go get a job. There was no allowances. There wasn't any handouts. At the time, probably about 12 or so, my mom lived in a beautiful area in North Carolina. We had grapevines surrounding our property. So I went out and collected lengths and lengths of grapevines that I could get my hands on, cut them and shaped them into wreaths, which then I sold with the bows and ribbons I could find literally left over from Christmas or birthdays. And then I started taking custom orders if someone wanted something to match their house, their door. So yeah, I created door wreaths out of grapevines and sold them.
I didn't know this.
I am not a very crafty person, but there was things I wanted to do that needed to get some cash flowing in the door.
Yeah.
So that was my first real job. That was created by me. Worst job, if I think back to it now, I was 16, worked at a Bennigan's. I don't even know if they still exist.
Oh.
So just your classic fast casual, which the term didn't exist then. Also back in North Carolina, but what made it the worst was my first full day on the job was Mother's Day. If you don't know anything about restaurants, the busiest, worst day on the calendar is Mother's Day because everyone wants to take their mom out. So the kitchen, which is where I worked, making sandwiches, salads, and desserts.
Baptism by fire. Welcome to it.
And I love a hospitality experience because you are humbled on day one. You are there to serve each other in the kitchen, to serve the client. But wow, I had to do some serious multitasking really fast that day. I lasted through the summer.
I was going to ask if you stuck it out.
I stuck it out through the summer because in the kitchen, by the way, it's somewhat air conditioned. And in summer work in North Carolina is really hot. So I'd rather do that than sit by a pool and lifeguard.
And it was up to you if you wanted something, you had to work for it. So I get it.
So in the rest of my life, I've always, I hate the words judged, but assessed someone as to whether or not have they ever worked in hospitality.
Yes.
Because you can tell when someone has.
Retail career and felt that same way. You have a different level of appreciation for people in service industry and just show them more respect and kindness because you realize a lot of times it's not their fault and they're humans. So don't necessarily deserve all your frustration, right? So many things, but I like that. Yeah. I can relate there for sure. I didn't know that your entrepreneurial
my spirit was that
spirit started so young. Or that was one of the first things. When's the last time you made a wreath?
That's a great question.
Probably a long time ago.
Yeah, I decorate them still because I'm forced to. My family likes Christmas decorations. I don't. Kind of like your Dairy Queen took you a long time to go back to it.
Yeah. I
think I don't want to go near wreaths.
Well, I'll check in each holiday season to say, like, is it time to reboot this? You want to do some sort of team building here where we create them? You can show us the ropes. It did make me think of something that wasn't my first job, but kind of recognize. At one point in school, I didn't understand what I had done, but I guess I had created a ring of candy bar salesmen or candy bar salespeople in the lower classmen. Like I was initially getting these boxes of candy bars from Mark's at a heavy discount and realizing, well, in the cafeteria, this stuff's so expensive. So selling it in I think it was a junior at the time or something. I was like, man, I could go a lot further if the freshmen and sophomores were distributing this. So you did your
MLM program?
I guess I started a multi-layer marketing program in high school, yes. So some of the sales jobs that came next, and also some of the affinity towards more entrepreneurial jobs. I haven't shared that before, but I guess what you made me think of that connection as well. It's like, what was my first foray into entrepreneurship? And then I had a longer hiatus than you, though. I stuck with that, more Dairy Queen, the more corporate side of things for a while. But I know you did as well, right?
I did.
You want to tell us a little bit more about?
Yeah, it was right after college. It was time to get a real job. Part of my family has owned a manufacturing company since before I was born, and a lot of family members are allowed to step into it. I looked at it and said, no. I really wanted my family to be my family, not a board meeting, not to be colleagues or coworkers. And so I was fortunate enough, I was invited to join a Fortune 200 company, got some extraordinary training at a very young age and a lot of responsibility at a very young age. But corporate structure is very rigid, very lockstep, but I was gifted a lot of opportunities. I called them entrepreneurial opportunities because it was still within a corporate structure. The culture at this company was about continuous improvement. What can we do better? What can we do less of? What can we save money doing? And that was like a sweet spot. So we had a lot of freedom to go find better ways of doing things. And so at the time, I was tasked with finding a way to improve our inventory. Both, and it started with finished goods, and then it, of course, naturally went into, well, what comes first? What come before that? So the WIP had to be taken care of as a work in process or work in product.
Yeah.
And then raw. What the heck was going on with our raw materials? So that became something else I worked on for a number of years.
Did it tap into something like your
Yeah, I always
innate?
I just like making things better. Sometimes to my own detriment, because am I satisfied with done or perfect? So that's a whole other session we can get into.
We'll probably scratch the surface of it a little bit when we talk Kolbe in different action modes. And I know we have an affinity to do things or get stuff done in a different manner.
Yes,
I'm
we do.
sure I drive you nuts sometimes with that, but
I drive you nuts with my stuff.
and because we talk about it openly, we've identified it, gives us a language. I think that helps us, work better together and have a stronger
Yes.
connection to balance.
One of the things we'll really dive into is how our Kolbes, our natural Kolbe A's, are really great puzzle pieces to getting collaboration and productivity better.
Before we go down the Kolbe rabbit hole, it's not a rabbit hole. It's something that, by design, I want to spend some time talking about today because I think there is such value to it, and you have such crazy level expertise and stories in it. But you've mentioned family a couple times.
Yep.
That was your personal best. It was a motivating factor for the work that you did. One of those first three questions, in order to peel back layers, get to vulnerability, is family dynamic. Tell us a little bit about what is Shareworthy? What is the high level drive for you? You mentioned you have 3 kids, but just give us a better understanding of your family dynamic and how that has an impact on who you are.
Sure. So mostly it's kind of origin story. It felt normal to me. It's all I ever knew. But my parents divorced when I was tiny. I have no memory of them being an intact family. But I had the most amazing, Wonder Woman role model of a mother. But she had to make a lot of hard decisions, hard choices to be the breadwinner and raise 2 children on her own, my brother and I. So she was gone a lot. So independence was expected at an early age. So using that as kind of a stepping stone or a touchstone, when I became a mother, I knew I wanted to be what I was missing, what I needed. So my children always knew from the time they were little that I had their back. Not to rescue them. I let them fall and fail once in a while, but I have always been available to them. And I'm still, as adults, they know they can text me with some business question, some personal question. I was always around for them if they needed me.
You hit on a couple things there that this was a 3-hour podcast. I'd love to open up each one of them because I think they do naturally fit in so well with leadership and things that we talk about, with letting them fall sometimes and modeling yourself, not just after the strengths around you that you saw, but even the pains that you felt, realizing I want to make sure that my children don't feel that way, that's something I can provide them. We argue sometimes when we talk peak leadership about, do you grow more through having that mentor at your side, guiding you along the way, or through the adversity that comes with the latter, right? And I think if you have a learner mindset, you learn from all of it. You grow from all of it. But
Absolutely.
on my end, family dynamic, I used to think it was a really large family because it's like Italian family Sunday dinners with consistency. And then I met my wife, and her family is 18 times the size of mine. I was like, oh, this is what a big family is like. But, I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. My family's been here for a while. And my parents got divorced at a young age. I think it was 3. So I had the benefit and the advantage. My mother and I lived with my grandparents, and they had such influence on me. I'm so grateful for them. They passed a couple of years ago, but to live with them until I was adult, and I moved out when I was around 18. And now, I mentioned I have 2 kids, my wife. Sarah and I have been together 20 years. married since 2016. And those things absolutely shape and influence all that I do as well. And taking into the third one, that fits nicely, childhood challenge. I'll hit this one first, then kick it back over to you. I think that the separation, divorce at a young age absolutely was an obstacle or something that I didn't fully realize then or until years later, some of the impact that it might have had. And while I absolutely recognize the benefit of getting that influence from another generation as well, and just more accessibility and close relationship with my grandparents by living with them and my mother, and still connecting with my father, getting closer over the years. I, in recent memory, kind of picked up on one of my biggest skill gaps as a leader was that I had a hard time with giving really, really direct criticism. I was almost a people pleaser and had that peace at all cost affinity because of that conflict at a young age. I just wanted everyone around me to be happy. I wanted to make people smile and had that high concern for others, think about what they're feeling almost to a fault. And I did eventually kind of peel back layers and connect the dots there. But as a child, I was an only child. So just wanting to always have friends around, wanting to have a sibling, and just that time with parents. I think that was a hurdle that I'm sure many people can relate to, that I later recognized, like, wow, wouldn't change it for the world. Like, so much good came from it, and I'm happy that I learned what I did and grew the way I did because of it. How about you? Childhood challenge, something that shaped you, had a big influence on who you are.
Shaped is the appropriate word, I suppose. So back to being just imagine a 16-year-old. I've got a new license. Now I'm in a very competitive high school, and I'm in a pretty horrific car accident. Like, lots of things broken, including face, knees, etc. Coming out of recovery, a couple days later, a nurse comes in and says, "Sweetheart, I certainly hope you're smart because you're never going to be pretty again."
Oh,
I wasn't really sure how to respond to that one, but at that moment, I thought, well, I think I'm pretty smart, but I got better double down on this right now. So I have been a self-taught, got to get ahead based on that one pretty insensitive comment.
wow. You don't like find yourself not pretty, right? Like that's
From
that's
that
sort of,
moment on, is like, it doesn't matter what I look like. I mean, I've been told both sides of that, but
wow.
I wanted and needed to focus on my intellect.
It comes through. I have a feeling it may have anyway, but there was like a chip on your shoulder.
Oh,
That
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, think about your average vapid, self-centered 16-year-old.
oh yeah, I'm
Then,
familiar.
so that was mine.
Wow, I love this. I didn't know that about you, and uh, it's funny. We've worked together for about a year and a half now,
Hmm.
and just pausing, being intentional, and asking a couple questions like that. It just forms closer connections. And
Absolutely. We teach this so much with our teams and both of our types of sessions we do. And when you want someone to be truthful or vulnerable with you, you've got to start it first.
leaders
Set the tone.
leaders go first. Otherwise, it won't be as sincere or genuine, right? Because you haven't opened the door for it. But much more willing to return, whether it be criticism, whether it be openness and vulnerability, if your leader does model it. I love having these discussions, having questions that we ask, things that we keep in our kind of tool bag, just things that we think to and pull out. But knowing the person in front of you is always most important, in reading the interaction that you're having. So I want to make sure we carve out enough time here for the many things I think listeners can benefit from your sharing about. So let's talk Kolbe.
Let's talk about Kolbe.
Kick that off how you'd like to, and tell our listeners, what's Kolbe? Why do they care? How is it going to actually benefit them in any way?
So the majority of people that, of course, listening, maybe a few of us looking at our faces, Kolbe is Kolbe, not Colby. It is a woman's last name. Her name is Kathy Kolbe, and she is the futurist, inventor, theorist that created Kolbe. And I have the great privilege, great gift, have been trained by Kathy and her team. I was recently said it was a humble brag, but it is truly a privilege to be in her presence. She's just full of wisdom and also generosity. She shares so much about it. So Kolbe, on a high level, is an assessment.
Okay.
And we can talk more about the ones that are most commonly known in our world, especially for the entrepreneurs. It might be DISC,
Sure.
Myers-Briggs,
Predictive index,
culture index,
strength finder.
So they're all wonderful. They all tell you something about yourself. The reason I chose to get certified in Kolbe is the only one that tells you how you take action. And for me, that made all the light bulbs go off, because you can have all the personality assessments or intellectual assessments, but how you take action means productivity, efficiency, communication, procrastination.
No doubt.
And Kathy's way of teaching simplifies it. And as you and I teach with, our EOS work and our coaching work, is when you can boil it down and simplify it, it's more readily applicable. You don't have to have a PhD in this. You don't have to sign up for 700 hours of coursework to be able to use it. So backstories, I was certified in Kolbe about 4 or 5 years ago. Forgive me, I can't remember the exact date.
Okay.
I was actually introduced to it because being an EOS implementer, it's required when we go through our training. EOS does a Kolbe A on all of us. So we know who we naturally are, what an Kolbe A assessment stands for. There's others I'll dive into in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Getting my results was such a great day for me, because I looked at it, read my results, and then there's also an audio file that comes with it. And it's Kathy explaining how wonderful we each are. And for anyone who's never taken their Kolbe A, what you'll find when you get your result is, first of all, you get congratulations. You got a perfect result.
Right.
Because in Kolbe, we are all perfect. But unfortunately, the world and our jobs and our expectations and obligations don't let us be perfectly who we are. So in a way we define freedom is to be yourself. And that's how we define success in Kolbe. So getting my results, which I am an 8-6-4-2, and I'll go through what that all means. By definition in Kolbe, that means I'm a strategic planner. And you've known me for about 1.5 years. You probably shook your head and go, oh yeah, that's her.
I'd say that's fairly accurate. Can you, real quick though, you hit on how you define success in Kolbe. I want to make sure that stands out and was clear.
Certainly, it's freedom to be yourself, which means taking action, doing things the way you would naturally, not how someone's told you to do it.
Yeah.
Not how you've always done it in the past. Because if your natural inclination is not how you're doing it, you're going to feel frustrated, fatigued, maybe ticked off. The easiest example is, if we've got the cameras rolling, Joe, pick up the pen with your dominant hand and write your name. And we see Joe using his right hand. And regardless of how legible his handwriting is, that is his natural way of doing it. Now, Joe, please indulge me by using your left hand.
I love this. Doesn't mean I'm practiced in any way, but I have introduced it.
So this is a simple, simple way of defining your freedom to be yourself. Your natural inclination, your MO, modus operandi, is you're striving when you pick up your right hand, and you could do it, and you probably have done it with your eyes closed. Now, when you do it with your non-dominant hand, your unnatural way, harder.
It was frustrating.
Yeah,
even though I've done it a couple times when introducing that quick exercise.
So that is the most simple way of defining what a Kolbe helps us understand. Your natural way of taking action.
It's not that you can't do it.
No.
Right?
If you spent all day writing with your left hand, you'd be so fatigued, so frustrated. The results wouldn't get any better, probably.
It took me longer. I had to think harder. And the result still kind of sucks.
Yeah. So now apply that into your job, anyone's job who's listening.
Yep.
If you have to do something in an unnatural way for 8 hours a day, you're going to use up all your energy doing something less productive with less really stellar results.
And sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Like you're banging your head against the wall because maybe you've had a history of being really excellent at what you do. And all of a sudden, there's this variable that you don't quite understand. And we often attribute it to the humans on the other side. It was liberating for me
Yeah.
when I took the Kolbe for the first time. And I've always been kind of an assessment nut. I seek them out.
But let's talk about yours, your A results. Very different than mine.
They're pretty different, yeah. And I think prior to Kolbe, I'd be like, yeah, we just don't necessarily work well together or don't get things done the same way. And like I was certified in predictive index and other things and built programs around it that wouldn't have really told me why that is. So I guess you tell me what between your 8642 and my 5392, I believe.
Yeah, your 5392 and my 8642. Imagine, I like to look at it this way, two sets of bird wings go like this. They fold together. So it's a perfect puzzle piece. So how I naturally take action on a new concept is I do questions to the point where somebody's going to roll their eyes and probably run away. But unless they respect me and value what I'm bringing up, my 8 in Fact Finder, which is the first mode, I have to get a lot of facts and figures, historical references, validity. That's where I start. When you get a new project, hey, Joe, go make a podcast.
Let's go.
Your inclination is your quick start, which is your 9. That is a risk aversion, risk and uncertainty. You are halfway down the runway, already got a million ideas ready to go. No questions asked. You heard podcast and you envisioned this room, this space, the guests, the questions. I would have caught up with you in about a month after I asked more questions, interviewed other podcasters, did my research.
Some of that would have been helpful, right?
Right.
And
It's like a belt and suspenders approach.
Because you kind of need that.
You need both.
Happy middle, right? I benefit greatly from slowing down some of the research, some of the thoughtfulness. I now feel confidence in this and recognize as a strength. I will drive things forward with speed and try to bring them to life quickly, if not correctly.
Yeah, what we've discovered here at Culture Shock is when you come up with a new program, a coaching module, you're great at throwing everything against the wall. And then you'll give me the permission, the gift to let me come in and review it. Not just for spelling errors or could we say it differently?
Right.
Or here's what's already worked in the past. Or sometimes it's like, hey, this is content that probably belongs to someone else. We do have to do an attribution for, but you've got it. Right. So we have a really good handoff to that.
Format, structure, effectiveness, details,
right.
Things I wouldn't have even thought of.
So back on the higher level, what Kolbe does for teams, most of our listeners are going to be someone on a team, unless you're a solopreneur. Kolbe helps you identify the unique gifts, the strengths of the people on your team. First yourself, then your colleagues, your team. Then it helps optimize, because if we're stuck doing things that are not in our natural MOs, not in our natural gifts, we want to make sure we're optimizing that as much as possible. I mean, if anybody going through looking at utilization of their people, whether they can do it down to the macro level, micro level of how many X per hour, optimization is key, right? And then it creates alignment. Are we building? Do we have the right team? And we can look at what our Culture Shock team looks like with our team dynamics. And what Kolbe can do when I look at teams is I can help teams understand what the impact's going to be by removing a team member or adding someone, both positive and negative.
I think that's a big one. So shouldn't be in a research analyst type role? Could I do it?
Yes, Joe, you could be a research analyst. However, you would do about 15 minutes worth of work and then need to get up and move around.
To get some energy
Get some energy, because all your energy is drained.
Yeah.
I, however, can sit quietly for hours with physical books, digital files, notepads. I'm just happy collecting lots of details and data.
And because I know this about myself, I'm going to find work that aligns with that. Because to your point, it can bring you energy instead of stress, right? And
Right.
boy, as I've gotten to, I know enough about the Kolbe system to be dangerous and also to get myself in trouble. So I lean on you. But for me, it has really helped be clear and honest and unapologetic about here's what I'm good at. These are the things that I should be leveraged for. These are the things I shouldn't, because I'm not trying to write with my left hand all day.
Exactly.
I don't want to deplete every bit of the finite amount of energy I have by noon.
Exactly.
Or then for the rest of the day, I'm just finding a way to recharge.
Yeah, if we could just look at it as optimization of human energy, this doesn't talk about talent. It's not
Right.
talking about your intellectual skill sets. We clearly have those, but this is your energy.
For those other assessments, the ones that people may be familiar with or more familiar with, maybe using Myers-Briggs, DISC, can they be used in conjunction? How would you recommend, like if somebody is using Kolbe or considering it to enhance their hiring and placement, team fit practices and things like that, but they already have something in place, is it don't use it anymore because now Kolbe replaces it, or is there a way to?
No, I really like to look at it as another leg to the stool, another element of who this person truly is, because we're not flat. We're not two-dimensional, right? So company ABC is interviewing a candidate. They're looking at their intellect, their experience. So that's somewhere riddled on the resume, right? They've got a skill set they're matching to. So that's where maybe an SAT, ACT, or graduate level is assessing that, but also the candidate program. So they've got credentials, right? That's your intellect.
Okay, kind of your cognitive
That's
ability.
your cognitive. Exactly. Now, fabulous assessments. These typically are assessing your affective, which is basically your values, what motivates you. And this comes from experience, exposure to family, to other companies, and some internal, what's driving you, right? Now, the third leg of the stool could be the Kolbe, which is your conative. And yes, it will get auto-corrected to cognitive. Conative means simply this, how you take action. So if you've got a view of a candidate, they fit your culture, that's your affective. They fit the job requirements, right? Your intellectual, your cognitive. Now, how are they going to take action and get things done? Here's your conative.
I can see that being helpful. I've lived it.
So we find is when I meet with clients that I've already said, oh, I don't need Kolbe. I've got some other brand of an assessment. I'm like, great. Is it working for you? Are you truly using it and not weaponizing it, right? We don't want to have somebody pigeonholed because just they're a whatever brand of assessment it might be, that extreme. Same thing with Kolbe. You and I are extremes in our Kolbes. We can't just say, oh, Jed's a quick start. He'll never get anything done. And, Kimberly's a fact finder. She's just going to drive us nuts with questions. No, we don't want to weaponize that.
I do throw that precursor out there about not weaponizing it, because of course it can be.
No.
When people look at it and find then ways to make new excuses about things.
Here comes the bias. So this is helping us to limit the bias, right?
For sure.
So how you use it in a work setting, it can be used for recruiting, attracting and retaining the best talent. Kolbe does also offer something called Right Fit. That is where we can look at your ideal candidate pool, matching them to your job-specific needs, and we can actually grade your candidates as to who's going to be the best performer in your teams. Takes a little bit more data than 1 or 2 data points, but it really does work well. As I mentioned before, it can help if you already have your Kolbes on a team. We can look at what's going to happen if we introduce a new person to the team and what their unique Kolbe is going to be, how it's going to impact it, positively or negatively. And you and I have talked about how there are 2 different ones we look at. It's called synergy. We're striving towards ideal synergy, a team that's got great balance of all different attributes, different parts of Kolbe. And there are teams that suffer because we tend to hire people exactly like us.
Right. This is the piece, Kimberly, that has been the most tangible, the most applicable for me, is looking at the team synergy or team dynamics and how if I'm building a plane, and then need to fly that plane, the pilot and the engineer probably have some different action modes, way of getting stuff done. If I hire only pilots because I'm cloning myself, and that's who I am at the executive team, probably going to miss some steps and that plane's going to crash.
Right. And you've mentioned the great words cloning. In Kolbe, we call it conative cloning. If we have an entire team or a majority of a team that are nearly identical in their action modes, they're going to run into some issues, some challenges. Example is I was working with a team that was the majority were initiating, they take action first, with fact-finding. Me, my eights. So 10 people on a team, 8 of them begin with fact-finding. They're going to get into that analysis paralysis.
Long meetings.
Really long meetings that don't go anywhere. Or, I mean, there's going to be some great innovation, but they have to know when to stop innovating and take action and start implementing.
Yeah.
So what happens there when I see this type of scenario with or without a Kolbe, I'll say, hey, how many new innovations have you come up with this year? 100. How many have you innovated?
I'm guessing you'll sometimes have a need recognized where even that same group, somebody's going to flex to an action mode, strength and area that the group needs, even if it's not their natural way of doing.
Absolutely. Someone's going to say, enough. We've got to decide. And that's where typically my quick starts come in. You, Pete, Ron, Jim. We have a lot of quick starts around here.
We have this entrepreneurial operating system based company, and we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and yeah, it can get the best of us if we don't have our Kimberly, our Liz, our Amy, other team members. The balance. When there isn't that balance and somebody has to flex over to cover some of these areas, they burn out.
Yes, they can get uncomfortable fast.
Because it is that writing with your left hand all day, that conative stress that they get from having to do something that's just not so natural for them. Do you have any stories where you're working with the team, because between Kolbe and EOS and everything else you've done, I'm sure I could credentialize further by talking about numbers of executive teams that you've worked with and things. It's implied. Is there one that stands out where there was a missing method?
Right. We call it missing method in Kolbe.
You realize there's nobody on this leadership team with high quick start, or nobody with high follow through, or an initiating factor in fact finder. And how, when you insert that missing puzzle piece, do you have a story that comes to mind where it was that aha realization and then, wow, positive change when you fixed it?
Very similar to the story I was beating with a team that had all initiating fact finders. They loved questions. They wanted details. They were just iterating, going in circle after circle after circle, until we brought in someone who was initiating a quick start, who just kind of looked left and looked right and said, why are we still going down this, as we love, rabbit holes? Put an end to it. Because they were also lateral on leadership, there was a level of respect, and there was an understanding that this person was correct. So injecting a different Kolbe strength changed the dynamic of the team.
I understand why this is coupled with EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, for new implementers, and how that you were introduced to it, because there's a lot of emphasis on right person, right seat.
Exactly.
Building well-rounded teams that balance each other. Somebody can be the right person for an organization and be in the wrong seat. And you may notice maybe there's somebody who's not in the executive team, but somebody right alongside it who can complement, even if they don't have the cognitive or the experience that you would typically want, where their input can still level up the effectiveness of that team in a big way.
Yeah. It just takes one look at who's in the room, the dynamics that you're seeing, and then let's just borrow a bit of someone else's strength. I will say, if you can't do that, if you don't have this as an option, there's some artificial things you can do. One team I just coached, and I said, look, you need to set an alarm clock in your meetings, because they were just spiraling. And so just put the alarm clock on and say, okay, at this point, we need to stop. If you're going down a great aha, it's just an alarm clock. They're not going to get offended if you tell it to stop.
Last thing I'll ask on this, and of course, anything else you want to share, because I know we'd love to just expose as many people to this as possible, so we can leave with that at the end. But you mentioned kind of the wings of a bird and them complementing each other. EOS has this visionary integrator dynamic, which is a little unconventional for some,
Yes.
right? Based on what they would expect the accountability chart or typical hierarchy of an organization to look like. As we start to move into EOS, I think this is a great segue. Can you talk about the power of that visionary integrator combo, but really why two people with such different action modes, what that relationship often looks like, and why it's so important?
So I don't want to say outright there's an ideal Kolbe for visionary versus integrator. I've seen lots of varieties, but some stereotypes do stand the test of time. So here at Culture Shock, we can just use our own example, our own team.
Sure.
Our visionary is a 9 quick start, Ron Kaminsky, who comes up with 1,000 ideas a day. Some are fantastic. Some we need to set aside with all due love and respect. But then we have an integrator. And the integrator, her leading Kolbe strength, forgive me, I think 7 or 8 in follow through. She can take the brilliant ideas as the follow through strength and decide, are these systems and processes we need, don't need? And it's a harmonious balance that happens. So in EOS speak, we always say that the ideal relationship of a visionary and the integrator is called rocket fuel. Part of the book, part of the academy. I always look at them and there's some visuals for it. They're missing puzzle pieces, just like the wing. The strengths and styles of action are very, very different, but there's that intellectual, social respect that says the visionary's job, their greatest gift to the organization is coming up with brilliant ideas, big relationships. The integrator's greatest gift is harmoniously integrating and also pushing back when it's necessary to protect what's right and best for the organization.
I've come into contact with, we'll call it a couple organizations where it is just the CEO, the owner, the founder. And without having that mutual respect, that complementary relationship and role within the organization, I have seen people naturally fear speaking truth to power and lose sight of or not have a true pulse of what's going on around you because nobody will challenge you, right? And that you said the word harmonious twice. It probably doesn't feel harmonious in the beginning.
No,
right?
It feels pretty awkward and bumpy for a lot of people.
When I've introduced this, I've talked about the fundamental attribution error being something where we attribute issues with others generally to character flaws, right? Somebody cuts you off on the highway as they're merging, and this guy doesn't know how to drive, probably got some choice words, maybe even a finger on the hand or two, and it's not that one unless it's down. Whereas if we do the same thing the next day or next week or what have you, we're probably talking about the phone call that just came through, how we dropped this, the person in front of me who slammed on their brakes, the coffee I spilled. We attribute our own issues to circumstance and situation. Right. And I've found so often that when there is that natural conflict in way of doing that often a visionary and integrator would have, previously, without having a language and identifying it, we may have just chalked it up to we don't work well together, and that person has character flaws.
Right.
And it's far from
work
harmony.
with someone who's just like us.
We'd rather do that cloning and hire ourselves, right? Any advice on getting through that to the harmony that you described?
So as I mentioned, there's not always going to be an ideal, but stereotypes are there for a reason. If the visionary and integrator have the understanding, appreciation of the common language of Kolbe, they know it's a clear handoff. And those fundamental attribution errors, as you just eloquently stated, go out the door. It's like, I'm not being difficult by asking you questions. I'm not trying to be a person. It's just who I am.
It's a service. Like I see it, I'm trying to help.
Right. And we'll often here at Culture Shock, and we're iterating or making rocks, the EOS quarterly goals. We know that there's going to be a natural strength for you initiating quick starts to throw a whole bunch of stuff on the whiteboard. And for those of us, Liz, Amy, myself, to come back and say, okay, that needs to be written more specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Does it truly fit into our time horizon? Is this the biggest priority?
You said common language. When you have a common language, all of a sudden,
It eliminates misinterpretation.
because there's so much confusion and misinterpretation. We don't clarify understanding. We're using different terminology and language. And by having a introduction to Kolbe, introduction to any sort of system or book or what have you, kind of gives you this platform to have some dialogue around it and use this common language. And there's absolutely something to that. So for our listeners, that sentiment of whether it be Kolbe, and we'd love for you to take a Kolbe assessment, learn more about yourself and your team. Right now, we're offering a free Kolbe assessment through Culture Shock and review with Kimberly.
Yeah. So if you're curious, this resonates with you, we'd love to help you learn more about yourself, give you some more freedom to be yourself. So after you take your Kolbe A, you're going to get your results right away. You're going to get about a 16 to 20 page report. You're also going to get an audio file, but because we really want to strive towards our goals here at Culture Shock to discover and engage leaders, I will be offering an interpretation of your Kolbe to really get true, relevant questions answered for it.
What can you do with it? We always bring it back to,
how do I take action with this?
No doubt.
So I want to just also not forget to add the good news and the bad news about Kolbe is this. The good news is it's truly who you are. The bad news for some people is Kolbe does not change over your life. It has one of the highest levels of consistency. So some of the other assessments are more of a snapshot in time. It's who you are at 25 at this job, who you are at 36 at that job, because you're responding to it. Kolbe, after the age of around 16, 17, does not change with very, very rare occasions. So I stipulate the age because there are separate Kolbes for younger readers. The words are different, but the results will be similar.
There's a whole system, right? So there's different Kolbes, and of course you can learn more on that. Maybe convo for another day, but truly, if you want to understand why you get shit done the way you do, and the same thing about your team, if you go to cultureshock.com and just fill out the main form submission, I believe you can select free Kolbe assessment, and then we'll put you in touch with Kimberly from there to talk about this. Even when you have this platform and language, it does let you introduce and be more open and honest about topics that otherwise you may not be able to. It doesn't mean that we don't still have conflict in our quarterlies or that we don't still embrace that when there are different action modes, but we don't let it become resentment under the surface.
Absolutely. It's healthy conflict,
Yes.
as Patrick Lencioni teaches, because you've got to have healthy conflict. Otherwise, you're going to have what? False harmony. No resentment under the surface.
I think there's a lot of that false or artificial harmony.
Yes, you could correct me. Thank you. Artificial harmony.
Every organization I've been a part of, at some layer or level, it's there. It's persistent. And EOS, I'd love it if you could explain it to a fifth grader, but that's seems to be a fairly large component of it as well, is that open and honest dialogue, the
surfacing issues, solving issues. Nothing gets duct tape and twine on it.
So let's break into that, because I know that takes up a lot of your capacity.
It does.
And is core to what we do. I think listeners know by now we operate on EOS here, but 3 of our team members are also implementers of this system. What the heck is it?
Entrepreneurial operating system is not software. Oftentimes it's easier to define something by what it's not. It is a operating system for your business, as long as your business has people. If you are a 100% automated factory, probably not your thing. It is really just about getting the most alignment around a vision, growing accountability with your team, not holding people accountable, they hold themselves accountable, and getting the best results for what your goals and objectives are. It teaches a cadence of meetings, it teaches a common language, and it creates focus and environment where people can thrive.
It was far simpler than I expected when it was first introduced to me.
It's
I think
simple, but it's not easy.
we've said it a couple times in this podcast so far. I think that's often the case, but we need simplicity so that way we can get common understanding, so we can explain it to others. And there is a whole library of EOS books that are not about software, that are about how to get clarity on that vision, achieve healthy traction as you grow your business. And you can check out Traction, check out What the Heck is EOS, Rocket Fuel, you already mentioned about that visionary integrator combo. Process, one of the newest
Process, the
additions to the
newest one.
library.
And if you love a good story, a fable, absolutely one of my favorite ones is called Get a Grip. It's a story of a company that's just not getting the results they want until they bring in EOS and an implementer. But it's a really good, simple read, and it's not a textbook. It's a great story that will hopefully resonate with our listeners.
EOS Life for me was the most meaningful.
Do what you love.
With the people you love.
Make a big difference.
With enough time for other.
You forgot.
Be fairly compensated.
Be fairly compensated and have time for other passions.
Enough time for other passions. And some of the exercises that has you go through can be uncomfortable, but also very revealing and give you more intention around where you want to go. And of course, you're going to find yourself in situations that are undesirable, that probably stress you out if you've not yet achieved clarity with yourself of what that ideal framework is, right? Like how you want to invest your time, what matters to you most. We think so often people do SWOT analysis on their business and they set targets and milestones and things like that for their organization, but not for their personal lives.
For their lives.
Right? And shouldn't we start there? Like you probably know what the core values are, whether you've set them or not at your organization. Hopefully they're not just on a break room wall somewhere, part of the onboarding. EOS, they're truly lived, used as a filter. But what about your own core values? Right? Like think about it and say them, but have you ever taken the practice of actually capturing those? That and quite a few things. I mean, EOS Life for me that's how it was introduced to me when I met with Ron before joining here. And we flirted for a while before we started dating and decided we were going to do some good work together.
It's okay. He refers to me as his stalker before we decided to work together.
Yeah. So let's open up EOS a little bit. You mentioned Implementer. There's an operating system. It's simple. It's for growing businesses. Why do they need an implementer? Why is that a factor in this? And is there some benefit or advantage of having this person who is outside of the organization but still in support to it? Like, what would your sentiment be there?
So going backwards just a bit, EOS is designed for entrepreneurial-minded companies. That doesn't mean you have to be an entrepreneur yourself, but you could be, a third-generation manufacturer like we have plenty here in Northeast Ohio, but more afraid of the status quo than they are of change. Like that. Oh, I know. I don't want to change. Change is scary. They want to grow. Top line, bottom line, product line, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We will get more out of your business, more for what you most want. Why would someone want to use an implementer? And always to make sure that there's a delineation. Integrators are people that are in-house at the company, more like a COO, head of ops. Implementer, sounds very similar, is an external EOS trained, certified professional or expert. We have all three levels here at Culture Shock, who is a neutral third party, comes into your company and helps the leadership team learn the tools, facilitates your sessions, and coaches you through this, how implementing EOS would work in your company. We're the eyes and ears that comes in with some outside expertise. We are not consultants. We
There it
don't
is.
have industry expertise. We might have it just as a happenstance, and we're comfortable with that. But all of us work industry agnostic.
There's probably some value to that as well. That
And it's so great to walk into a session room where the team gets to work on the business, not in their roles. Yes, they're still subject matter experts, but they get to really dig in that day while we are facilitating.
there's so much to EOS that just dip your toe in. I'm sure the recommendation, whether an organization works with an implementer or not, would still be consume traction, share it, talk about it, you use what you can, like find what's relevant to you and apply it. And that's the first step, because from there, and you talk to others in the community, you'll surely hear more stories of, why it could be worth investing in some sort of an outside facilitator, implementer, even if that's not something that you typically do or that you saw as part of the plan in your growth stage. And there's plenty of workforce development grants and other programs and things like that I don't think people always consider for leadership development, coaching, things like EOS, that I actually had clients recommend us to in another state to consider here in Ohio. And I was amazed. And I don't write the grants or anything like that or apply for them, but still, like, there's things that people can tap into to do what they need for their business. And I've seen, even outside of EOS, how having an outside party, an unbiased person come in who's objective, who can offer even the senior most people some accountability, can have profound impact. Like, real change can occur.
Yeah.
Instead of it being this same meeting, this same thing over and over and over again, because there's some underlying trust issue or communication issue or what have you. When there's also this system for that person to help you implement, I think it's been, I'm not an implementer. I'm here in the office, Traction Leadership Center. We have a space that's been curated for distraction-free, healthy, conflict-rich strategic planning sessions and development sessions and things like that. We're in the process of building out a second area for that. So every day of the week, whether I'm in here on a podcast or working with something on the Into the Storm leader side of house, I'm seeing groups come in to work with Kimberly, to work with Ron, to work with Jim, and I hear it. So although I'm not an implementer, I'm, again, familiar enough to be a little dangerous, but I'm fortunate enough to benefit from wisdom of the system and of you three, and to hear some of these stories from our clients.
As a reminder, if you've not stated it before, any one of our listeners that has been self-implementing EOS and wants to have a sharpening of their tools, all they have to do is get in touch with us. We don't charge a dime for that. We are a help-first organization. Just, hey, how could I get better at this? Because there's some things we've seen and done just to tweak it a little bit and really make your implementations much better. I just wanted to go back to, you were discussing what leadership sessions feel like, and I've just come off of 3 of them in a row. And there are days where sitting as the objective, neutral third party, I'm watching the body language, watching the faces, listening for those moments of silence where the heavy lifting has to get done. But when I have my team's Kolbes, I know I can tap into someone. If they're going in a direction that's needing more of a consistency, a process, I can say, look, we've got a 7 follow through. You should own this rock to create this new system process. Don't assign that rock. Don't let the person with a 2 follow through take that rock.
We know better. We know that about ourselves. We know that about the
The more you
team.
know about your individual team, right, and their strengths, you're going to set that person up for some severe frustration if they're like, I can't, they could do it. Frustrate them.
Mm-hmm.
So for me as a facilitator, as an implementer, when I know my team's Kolbes, I know who's in the room. I can speak to them in the language they want, which is my quick starts. I talk to them in bullet points.
Why, thank you.
You're welcome. And my fact finders, I will give them a pre and post follow up with a binder.
In the binder. Yep.
Tab. And my follow throughs, they want to know how it's going to impact history, current, and future. We often neglect our implementor, spelled slightly differently, the yellow bar in Kolbe, because so many of our teams just have people with more of a resistant level of that. It's the lower numbers, but that not a lower strength. A 2 or 3 implementer is someone who can envision an amazing outcome, but they may not necessarily be inclined to go pick up the tools and build it. So I never want to forget our implementers out there as well.
You can do it, but it's probably going to cause the stress, right? Like,
Right. If you all can
example,
see this amazing podcast studio, this was hand hewn by Joe.
and I think within a couple days of the quarterly and the decision to move forward with it, of course, I'd already visualized it, and it was more my inclination to move with urgency
Than accuracy.
and just through my own like self-coaching and experience that I had some level of competence or confidence in being able to do woodworking and stuff like that. But I'll tell you, I couldn't wait to get done. It was after I got started and the
Stressing you out.
initial joy, excitement of we're turning this into a reality. I was like, can somebody else just carry this thing across the finish line, because I'd sure like to focus on this other shiny object and go innovate something else now. So that was a little, probably a point of pride, something I was like, hey, you actually followed through and got this thing. I did it with the help of,
A few other people. But
uh,
we also have a team here, especially our integrator, who was looking at Joe every day. Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Why aren't you done yet?
I think it was more you, because you had some coaching
I
sessions
had
and you
some
were like,
sessions.
hey, can we use this room for that too? I was like, oh, I'm not going to let Kimberly down. We're going to get this thing done. All right. EOS is another topic that we could, I plan on having you on here.
We'll do this.
I'd hope to, with some matter of frequency. Surely people can benefit from even just story sharing.
We'll do some tales from the vault.
I like it. EOS, though, before we move into Storm's peak leadership, anything else that you want to mention?
It's for teams that are frustrated and want more out of their business. All they have to do is reach out to us. They'll have what's called a 90-minute meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Some people call them discoveries. It's just you will see and understand the tools, the process, and if it's right for you. We give that to anybody who needs a conversation about EOS.
Level 10 is a way of describing the meetings. Right? We're not going to fully open this up, but if a company is self-implementing and running level 10 meetings, is there anything there
If they're level 10 meetings and everyone's rating it an 8, you've got some liars in the room. Invite one of us in to observe your L10. We will be either a fly on the wall and then give you some great feedback on how you can get better. Or, as I like to say, I will play freeze tag through every element. I'll say stop, and I'll give some feedback quickly. But yeah, we love watching other L10s so we can really get some improvement for people.
One of my closest, deepest friends is actually how I was first told about, not fully introduced, but how I was first told about EOS. And he was at a company in Las Vegas that was operating on it. He talked about how it was the most disciplined, effective meeting he had ever been a part of. That there were like clear actions, it was very timely. Everyone had their part to share. So while it's a simple set of these tools like meeting effectiveness, having Kimberly or another member of the team observe one, like she said, we want to help first. We are anti-consultants. We don't do contracts. We don't do long-term retainers or anything like that. And if we're not the best fit, we're going to tell you. We have an abundance mindset.
We're going to find somebody who is.
Yes, we're happy to, because we want to work with people that we love, that we can make a big difference with, and we believe in servant leadership. Right? We want to serve because we realize that that's the weight, the responsibility of leadership. We take it seriously, right? And try to share that with others as well. That said, how about courageous leadership? And got buffaloes all over the place. I got one on the cup. I got to see him in Denver when I was out there a month or so ago. It predates me coming to Culture Shock, certainly, but it doesn't mean that some of the mentality it hasn't always been there. But what united us was that mission to discover, engage, and grow leaders. something that we still all have in common and promote awareness of, and this connection between buffalo mentality and courageous leadership and healthy culture, is this into the storm leaders, like how people have charged through difficult, uncomfortable situations head on to get a better outcome faster. What are some of yours? What are the ones that come to mind?
My personal ones or my companies I've helped?
Take it where you like. I think it's generally, I have people think like professionally, a time that you've charged into a storm. Maybe start there. But if there's one or two ancillary ones that you want to also share, sometimes we'll say, how about a time that you recognized after the fact you should have charged into a storm and did not? So I think all conversation around this is beneficial.
Oh, let's see. So actually, my discovery of EOS is a bit unconventional. I was working as a board member for a nonprofit, and one of my board members uses EOS religiously. He's a private equity investor. Every single company, his portfolio runs on EOS. He and I were having discussions about the programs of the nonprofit, and he said, everything you've suggested, everything you want to do is traction. And I said, what are you talking about? He gave me the book. And my storm then and there was, I need to do this. I need to become an implementer. I had no idea what to do next, but being a 8 fact finder, which I didn't know at the time, I read the entire library that existed at the time. I probably Googled everything I could come up with, including stalking Ron Kaminsky on LinkedIn, finding out who he was connected with, asked for an appointment. And I gave up a off-the-cuff proposal and said, I want to be an implementer. I don't want to be on my own. I know what my unique abilities are. What do you say? And he, with his 9 quick starts, said, let's go.
Wow.
So that's one of my storms, I suppose.
And that's how it
Just
started.
jumping in here.
Most EOS implementers, as I understand, are generally more solo.
Yes, absolutely.
Us being
We
probably
are the
not
anomaly.
the only
There's a few.
one, but a firm or collection of EOS implementers that is unique. And so that storm getting us to the origin of that then, right? Because
I'm not sure if I was the actual origin, but it was here in
here,
Ohio. Yeah,
and
so
culture shock, that connection, because of course we have Jim Tennant
who's
as
our third?
well. And he came in and
About
joined forces shortly.
it's about 2 years after I did.
Okay.
So that was one of my personal ones, I suppose.
Sure. What else? What else
I like
comes to
to
mind?
joke that so being raised in North Carolina, got married in January, and I had to move here about almost a month before. So Cleveland,
Welcome to Cleveland.
December 23rd was a blizzard. So my literal storm I had to get through was driving on I-77 for normally 8 hours, was more like 15 hours. My moving truck was lost in a blizzard. Everything I
Yikes.
owned was gone except what was in my car. And I still got here.
Well, what was the other option? Like what?
Turn back.
Turn back.
But I
right?
said that. I said to my husband, my then fiance, now husband, I said, I sold my house in North Carolina. My job is in Cleveland now. I can't turn back.
Yeah. I guess you could have, but if you did, where would you go? And it probably would have just continued to become a bigger and bigger issue
Right.
until you moved.
I think the easiest example that we can all relate to is what most companies, most of our clients went through during COVID with respect to a storm. Is I, like everybody else, I had to go home and sit in front of a computer and during our lockdowns here. And suddenly I had to learn Zoom, Teams, technology really fast. But the teams that reached out to me and just said, we've got to get through this. We've got a framework you taught us, but there's a lot of big change coming at us. I had one particular team that lost 90% of their revenue. 90. So we did weekly calls, not rocks anymore. We did weekly to-dos just to keep the company afloat. We had to do what's called a reverse accountability chart. They've had to make smart decisions who could stay on the team and keep the company afloat.
Yeah.
Fortunately, this company has a great outcome. They are back in business like crazy. There's a backlog of orders they have to fill. But it was the storm mentality of the owners, the founders, the leadership team that had to get through it. The privilege they extended to me of their trust with me to help them through it, all through Zoom. We couldn't even get in the same room together.
There were
Countless.
countless that came with that. And I try to always make sure it's clear that it's what we want to capture. It's not the times where it wasn't of course I'm going this direction. Of course, it's difficult, but I don't really have another option. It's where that other option is seemingly far more comfortable and more traveled. And in that situation, I can see there being plenty. Like, yes, there's the evolve or die, but lots of mini storms with people
Yeah.
issues and hard decisions that if you belabor, well, the storm becomes a lot bigger because then you crumble, you
Right.
fall. And it's going to suck, but you deal with it with urgency.
Right. We
With
teach, do you want
compassion.
long-term pain or short-term pain? You're still going to be in pain. Those examples, each of the smaller storms, and they're not small by any means when it comes to people issues,
Of course not.
people decisions. But when a team recognizes they have the wrong person and that person is finally exited, and I say they're liberated to go somewhere else,
Right.
made available to industry. It's a great way of putting it. The rest of the company coalesces around it. They function better. They get more done, less drama.
Yeah.
Those are not easy decisions. And as I say, as an implementer, when I'm writing on the whiteboard, I said, it's really simple for me to stand here with a marker and tell you what needs to get done and point to it. But you have to do it. I mean, we've helped companies get rid of whole divisions because it wasn't their sweet spot. It wasn't their niche. They were chasing after the wrong stuff.
And if fear rules your thought process or you're complacent, then it can have catastrophic recourse. For me, when you were talking about that, one that's clear as day for me is when I finally promoted someone to customer who should have not been a part of the team long before, but through my fear about the rest of the team's reaction. They had a lot of institutional knowledge. They had prowess in performance and things like that that had a impact on our entire location. I didn't charge into the storm early enough on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, I realized it was only going to get bigger and finally gained the courage to address it head on from a place of compassion and directness and just curiosity to say, what are the reasons that I'm seeing this stuff? And is it because you don't want to be here, or then why? What is it? And ultimately, I ended up having a really good relationship with that person. They were happier because doing some work that better aligned with his instinctive strengths.
Right.
And the rest of the team just rose up. And like you said, none of the people issues are small storms by any means. They surely don't feel it. And when there's livelihood and well-being of another human on the line, like you always take that seriously, or you should. But it doesn't mean you avoid it.
No.
At least a peak leader wouldn't. Right? At least the peak leadership experiences I've had with folks, mentors, coaches, teachers, family members, bosses, what have you. Those aren't the characteristics that I would expect there. How about you? When you think about peak leadership experience and the qualities of that person, if you're fortunate enough to have more than one, great. I'm sure you've come into contact with some pretty incredible freaking humans. I know with certainty you have. But when you think your peak leadership experience, give us a breakdown. What does that look like to you that you've kind of strived to emulate from that person?
That's a really great question. A particular person, I'm helping some people on her team. So I'm a bit of an adjacent to her, but all the great books that we reference on this podcast come to mind in her peak leadership. She is humbly confident. She has the multiplier mindset, Liz Wiseman book. She wants the best for her people and looks to them to grow and is willing to invest in them. but she gives them the gift of clarity of the vision and her expectations. This isn't just a free for all for what they want to do, but she will look deep into her organization and say, there is a gem. I need your help with this person. And these people, I'm given the great opportunity and privilege to coach. But it's the leadership at the top that saw these opportunities that said, look, I need to invest in my people. And it's not just, here, have a nice conversation, but these are the objectives I want met. So that is a true leader to me.
That was a hell of a breakdown, like a way of simplifying it. And boy, I strive to be less verbose and more concise. Words matter when you use less of them, but just the way that you just defined and described that peak leadership experience was powerful. I hope that resonated.
And the show notes will have all the books I just read.
It surely will. with links to any that I can find, of course. Anything else on that topic? I mentioned the point before about we learn from peak leaders, we learn from interns, we learn from everywhere. But
I think we learn most from our storms, right?
That's where I was getting that flip side, the adversity, the challenges.
I think you would also ask the great question of where did I wait too long? An example comes to mind, and hopefully our listeners have had the experience of needing to fire a client. It's not fun. It sounds really flippant. But this particular instance was, I was in a position where I believed I needed this client to grow my practice, to grow my experience, financial, etc. This was a highly dysfunctional team that I'd spent too much time buffering what I found to be a toxic leader from the rest of the team. And one day I finally got brave, went into the storm, and you're familiar with the issues list.
Quite.
I wrote last session, circled it, made it issue number 1. And I said, this will be our last session together. And they gave me the IDS. If you're familiar, was the identify, discuss, and solve. The root cause was a lack of humility by the leader, a lack of accountability. He had all the 4 toxins about blaming, shaming, stolen. So pointing out a lack of maturity, but that was our last session. I waited too long, and I took their money one time too many, and I gave it back.
Nice.
So that's where I waited too long.
Yeah. Well,
that was a fear-based decision we talked about before.
Respect to you for who you are, most importantly, but for even recognizing that and then responding how you did, because it's easy to stay in a situation for far too long, right? And knowing when to move on from person to client situation. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be painful. But like you said, pain now, pain later, rip the Band-Aid off, charge into it. Like that.
It's gonna hurt.
Takes
Short-term
courage, but those are some of the characteristics that we see in our peak leaders, right? They take action and don't expect things to be given to them or to just change without them addressing it and being more intentional about it. We mentioned free Kolbe A assessment, and Kimberly's willing to do a review.
Yep. We're going to do what's called an interpretation, so we get it really relevant for you.
With EOS, the
Free
90-minute meeting is always free.
And let us help with your L10s.
Yep. Meeting observation. And thank you immensely.
Thanks, Joe.
I'd love to ask before we wrap here, any closing words, things you want to make sure to share that you didn't get a chance to, words of wisdom for emerging leaders or executives?
There's lots of things that hopefully they can think through, absorb, write some notes to themselves,
for sure,
and ask when are they going to take action on it. That's all. And
that also kind of keeps it going for the next time. We'll probably have you on in the next month or so here to continue some of the dialogue, because there's a lot more I want to unpack. But I really wanted to first introduce our listeners to you. So thank you very much for today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
And listeners, thank you very much. As always, if you were just listening to this on wherever you get your podcast, you can check out our YouTube channel to see the video side of things as well. In the description show notes, you can get all the resources that you need too. So we hope you got something out of this. We'd like you to use this as a clarity break. Think about what peak leadership means to you and what actions you can take to be that peak leader for somebody else. And one of them could be learn more about yourself with a Kolbe. So that's it for today. Thank you, folks.